The Dallas Cowboys aren't chasing the Dolphins in 72. They're chasing the Eagles in the NFC East because right now I think the Eagles are going to win that division.
So we'll come to that in a second, but let's just quickly get to that part of the take before we dive into really the meat of this. Mike Tannenbaum, did Michael or did he not say something crazy?
Outlandish. They have a better chance of chasing the 2022 Dolphins than the 72 Dolphins.
What do you think of it, Sacho? What do you think of the take?
Hey, I'm going to just say that Jerry Jones needs new friends because the current ones he has are not giving him good advice. They're either lying to him or they're giving him false sense of reality. We saw the FaceTimes and the Zooms that Michael Irvin did with Jerry Jones. If that's who you're listening to, get some new friends.
Yeah, that's right. I can see him. Listen, we cut out the penalties, boss, and we're going on. I mean, a perfect season is well within our reach. That said, there is actually a story here. And that is that a year ago, the Cowboys looked like a poorly coached team with clock management and penalties. In the playoff loss, they were a poorly coached team with clock management and penalties. And now here we go with the first game of the preseason, and we got 17 penalties. Mike Tannenbaum, some will say, it's game one of the preseason. Should we be making a big deal of this, Mike T, yes or no?
Absolutely. And if I'm Jerry Jones, I simply would say, Coach McCarthy, at the end of the year, we gave you the answers to the test that if these self-inflicted wounds don't change, we're not firing you, you're firing yourself. And right now, what Coach McCarthy is simply doing is putting himself on the clock. I'm not talking about the end of the season. I'm talking about an in-season move. This is a team that should be competing with Philadelphia, as Chris Canty already said. But when you can't handle the clock and you lead the nation in penalties, it's unacceptable. They're not going to fire Mike McCarthy. He's going to fire himself.
I mean, it's a really, look, I understand the way you mean that, and that's the bottom line. But we know what they need to clean up, and I get it. It's one preseason game. I'm trying to find the line. Dan, we do your overreaction. Are we overreacting?
Well, yes. Anything you take out of a preseason game, yes. You're by definition overreacting. We don't. I'm a big one for you can't use preseason games as predictive elements. However, perception matters a lot. Right? And so when you come out and you're on the field for the first time since last year when you led the league in penalties, and you have 17 penalties in your preseason game, that only feeds into the perception that the problem is the coaching, that the problem is discipline, that the team is not well managed. And that is a perception that is going to continue to confront Mike McCarthy as we head into the season and throughout. So bad break for Mike McCarthy.
Well, Graz, I think this could be the reality of who the Dallas Cowboys are under Mike McCarthy, because when we start talking about teams that are highly penalized, that characteristic usually doesn't change unless there's a change at the top. You usually don't see teams get that stuff cleaned up unless they have a new head coach. And if you're Mike McCarthy, knowing that you were the most penalized team in all of football last year, no matter what your team does in the preseason debut, you would make sure that they're fundamentally sound, they play clean football, they don't have penalties. In that game against the Denver Broncos, they had more penalty yards going into the fourth quarter than they did have total yards of offense. It's absolutely unacceptable. And here's the other thing that worries me about the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah.
If we're keeping it a buck about this team, they are a less talented group than they were a year ago. And so when you start talking about the penalties, the self-inflicted wounds, the game management issues, it's going to be harder for them to overcome that in 2022. And so that's why I have some serious concerns about what this Dallas Cowboys team is actually going to be this upcoming season.
That's the other thing about what Michael said, is not just the comparison to 72. I mean, penalties were not their only problem last year, right? When they were playing outside the division, they were a very average team, even on offense, which was supposed to be their strength. So the defense was good, but it lived on turnovers. Can it be that good when it's not forcing turnovers? There are other questions besides penalties for this year's Cowboys to answer.
That's true, and 100% true, but I want to focus on the penalties for just another minute. Sacho, I'm trying to make up my own mind how big a deal we should be making about 17 penalties in a preseason game. You tell me.
It's a huge deal, Greeny. In football, coaches always say, at least the coaches I've had have said, you're either coaching it or you're letting it happen. And so it seems like Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys staff are letting these penalties happen. And Canty makes a great point. You don't just, penalties don't just magically disappear. You have to focus on them during practice. And so obviously for OTAs and the first part of training camp, the Cowboys haven't done anything to address their penalties issues for the last 2 years. But I think this can be a turning point to say, let's do do what the great teams do. We saw some teams even in college to avoid holding penalties from DBs. Put on boxing gloves so you can't hold. There are other drills that you can do to prevent or slow down penalties. Add referees and have them come and blow the whistle more at practice. Teams do that. And so for me, the Cowboys are letting this happen and they're beating themselves. They need it to change immediately if they want to have any chance to win in the playoffs.
I don't know about you guys, but this conversation is casting some real doubt in my mind about this perfect season. I mean, this whole chase for perfection. I'm starting to get really concerned about this. No, I mean, because here's the thing. If last week, if we had said, oh, how much stock should we put into the first preseason game for the Cowboys this year? We would have said, well, come on, it's not like they're going to have 17 penalties, or right? It's literally exactly. I think Graziano made the good point. It's literally, Chris, exactly what they couldn't have happened. And it's exactly what did happen.
But it just makes you wonder, what is Mike McCarthy and the coaching staff emphasizing at these practices? They've been in training camp for a little over 3 weeks.
Yeah.
What are you talking about if it's not penalties? I get the X's and O's is important, but this is not a team that has that kind of margin for error, because when you look at the talent that they lost, the people that left the building, it's going to be a lot tougher for them to overcome some of those mistakes that are avoidable if they had more discipline. So that's what I worry about with the Dallas Cowboys.
Final word.
Yeah, I mean, look, yes, preseason, maybe it's backups, maybe it's guys that aren't going to make the team, but that's the point. Like, what are you practicing coming off of last year? This has to be the paramount thing, and it sure doesn't look like it was.
Nope. They go out on that 3-hour tour yesterday here on the East River, and then the next thing you know, Michael Irvin's got him unbeaten. We got 17 penalties. All heck has broken loose while I was gone. Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.